Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast. This podcast is dedicated to your health and well-being, and in it I interview experts about nutrition, physical health, mental health, and I deliver my 5-minute food fact series, which are short episodes where I discuss nutrition-related topics. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host. I'm a lawyer turned nutritionist, and I'm on a quest to learn as much as I possibly can about living a healthy, active, and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, and sharing what I learn with you here on this podcast. The health and nutrition space can be a confusing one where information and misinformation mingle, and untangling fact from fiction and identifying reliable, trustworthy sources of information is not always straightforward. My aim is to help you do that by speaking with knowledgeable guests who can explain their area of expertise in an accessible way and provide you with practical tips that you can use to improve your own well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I'll quickly acknowledge that any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat or prevent medical conditions, and it's never a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today, I'm very happy to be here with life coach Steph Noon of Live Life Coaching. From my understanding, life coaching is about guiding people through a process of discovery about themselves to help them live the life that they desire. Steph is a great proponent of using positive psychology, tools and interventions to help her clients enhance their well-being and their resilience. So I certainly look forward to hearing more about that. Hi, Steph. Welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast.
Hey, Amanda. So good to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So, Steph, I'd like to start with some quickfire questions to get to know a little bit about you outside your work as a life coach. Steph, where did you grow up?
I actually grew up, it was then really considered country, but McLaren Vale, halfway really between McLaren Vale and Wollonga, and it was really, really lovely, free childhood.
Yeah, I bet. It's so beautiful there, isn't it? And your favourite form of exercise?
Well, I'm a little biased because I'm a sprinter, so I love sprinting. I love the feeling of the power of a sprint.
Yeah. Excellent. And we are going to come back to that a bit later in the podcast. Your go-to meal for dinner?
Oh, it's always, I'm a vegetarian, so it's always something stacked full of vegetables, probably a vegetable curry.
Yum. I love vegetable curry too, and it's easy to cook. What are you currently reading?
Oh, it's amazing. I'm reading Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown.
Oh, yes.
You've heard of it?
I have, and I know that you're a big fan of hers.
Yes, I am. Very, very much love her, and this book does not disappoint. Excellent.
And are you listening to anything that you're enjoying at the moment? Perhaps some music, a podcast, audiobook?
I consume podcasts all the time. I'm currently listening to, or nearly finished one that excites me so much, called Lifespan with, it's David Sinclair. I highly recommend it. Have you got it? Have you got the book?
I've got his book
up
there. Yeah. That would be very interesting. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow up with that one. And Steph, your dream holiday destination?
For me, it's anything that has mountains and countryside, anywhere in the world, as long as I've got a place to climb.
Excellent. As in hiking climbing or bouldering climbing?
Hiking climbing.
Yeah. So let's move on to your work and your background. So we met for a coffee, which was nice, and you told me that you had a career in marketing for many years before you decided to change course. So what were the reasons that you decided to change your career? And I believe it was around the age of 40.
Yep, that's right. So it was about 15 years ago, and I quite enjoyed marketing, actually. And it was just more my entire life. I've had this restless interest in psychology, just always humans interest me. And so the marketing side, that bit was really satisfied in there around the psychology of marketing. And it was really then once I had my own children and then started consuming quite a few books around child psychology that led me into thinking maybe I'd actually work in this space.
Okay. And isn't that interesting that at the age of 40, you still have a whole, time for another career, which is wonderful, isn't it? I think.
Isn't it?
So how did you go about making the change? What did you study?
So I originally thought I'd become a psychologist. So I looked into that, and whilst I was researching, I stumbled across life coaching, which 15 years ago wasn't terribly well known. And it just really resonated with me, the subtle difference. So there's definitely a place for both. It's not one better or worse. Psychology is primarily a deficit focus around what's wrong and how do we overcome that. And then life coaching was more around what do we already do well and what are our strengths and talents and how can we build on those? And that just sat more with me. I decided to do life coaching, and then from there, it didn't exist 15 years ago, not very broadly. And I stumbled then across positive psychology, which was a newer science. And as soon as there were qualifications available in Australia, I studied that, and that's been amazing.
Excellent. And I do want to talk about that in a minute as well. But first, was it nerve-wracking for you to leave, I guess, a solid career and a steady income to take this leap into the unknown?
That's an understatement. Yeah. I have to really attribute that to my husband because alone, I don't know I would have been brave enough to make that decision, but it was his unfaltering belief of me and in me and support and encouragement that gave me the foundation to take that step.
Yeah.
But yes, I was nervous for sure.
Wow, that's so lovely that you had that support in him. Yeah, because I imagine people without that support, as you said, may not feel the confidence to take such a leap.
And I work with clients all the time in that space.
Right.
Yeah, it is difficult for sure.
And you've lived it, so that's very interesting as well. So you mentioned positive psychology, and a lot of your work centres around that. You also said that it's a relatively newcomer in the psychology space, in the world of neuroscience. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what the origins of positive psychology are? How did it come about?
So the person considered kind of, I guess, the founder or father of positive psychology is Martin Seligman. And he was then a psychologist. And there's a book called DSM Manual for Psychology, which lists, it's so thick, that book, and it's got all of the things that can go wrong with us from a mental health perspective. And he just took over at the American Psychological Association, and as part of your charter with that, you're encouraged to explore something new. And he just went, so if we've got this list of all the things that are wrong with us, are there also things that are right with us as humans? And he explored that, and that, saw the beginning of positive psychology, because, yes, there are lots of things that are commonly good in humans.
That's so interesting, because when you say that, it sounds so obvious, but for the person who first had that thought, Martin Seligman, it's extraordinary, isn't it, to go against the mould?
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
And that was only back in the year 2000. It's really, in terms of science, it's nothing. But you're right, that the context, I can't remember the exact statistics, but I remember hearing him talk about back then, if you Googled psychology, there was just all it would list is every possible thing that could go wrong with you. And there was barely any papers whatsoever existed on the things that go well and how can you develop those.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because, humans are good at many things. Like some people are really resilient, some seem happy, and you do want to think, oh, how do they achieve that? Is that something we can apply to others? So can you explain a little bit more? You've touched on it, but what's the difference between positive psychology and traditional psychology?
The way I like to look at it, I think if we have, let's consider 0 is we're neither happy nor unhappy. And let's say -10 is as unhappy as we can get, and +10 is as happy as we can be. So we actually have a predisposition toward the negative. Our brain does. It's very much a survival mechanism. It was very helpful in our origins to be alert for anything that might be going to eat us or attack us. So with that negative bias of the brain, we'll tend to sit more in the low minuses, -1, -2.
Right.
If things go bad or, a lot isn't going well in our life, we can drop into further minuses. And that's where you would see a psychologist
Right.
to help you with these things that are wrong. And their aim is to clear the things that are wrong in a hope to get you back to maybe 0.
Right.
Whereas positive psychology works on the premise that what if we could build you into +1, +3? What if you could even be at +7? And there's all sorts of tools and strategies to do that, which we'll talk about later. But if I can imagine I could sit on a daily basis at around about a +7, and then when bad things happen, because they do, so it's really important actually, Amanda, that I mention right here, that positive psychology is not the premise that we must be happy all the time.
Of course.
Yeah, it's just saying as a general sense of well-being, I sit more in the positive. And then when the bad things happen, because they will in life,
Yes.
I might go from +7 to +2. But if I was already sitting, say, at -1 and the bad thing happened, I might go to -6. And that's a much darker place to come back from.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit then about happiness. You did say it's not the natural state for us to be happy all the time. But it's in the world that we live in, we're bombarded by social media images, and it can feel like we're expected to be perennially happy. But back to the basics, before we dive into that a bit more, what is happiness?
It's such a good point you make, and I feel really passionate about this. I talk to people all the time about if we have a pursuit of happiness, the irony is it will often make us feel less happy if that's our single-minded pursuit. If we build this sense that if I'm not happy, there's something wrong with me, then that leads to less happiness.
Yeah.
So in this context, and that's why I'll often refer to, I'll say well-being or other words than happiness, because they often accidentally can conjure up this image of you must be smiling. So I guess to differentiate happiness, we can either have happy states or traits. So a happy state would be if you and I just had a laugh about something, told a joke, and in that moment I'm clearly happy, and that's a momentary state of happiness. Or if I have my coffee in the morning, it makes me happy. A trait of happiness is just when you have this underpinning sense that my life is going well despite the challenge I might be having right now.
Right.
So I can cope with what's in front of me, but I have this underpinning sense that life is okay though. And that's the sort of happiness that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so it's a more grounded meaning of the word rather than what we might see. And do people have different or set levels of happiness or well-being?
They actually do. We tend to have a predetermined set level of happiness. Now, momentary things can lift that or drop that, but we'll generally return to our set point. The good news about positive psychology is, and this is based in a lot of work by Professor Sonia Lieber-Miesky, who will say we can reset our happiness set point by doing intentional, using intentional tools and strategies, which again, I'll talk about some after, won't leave everyone hanging, but we can do things that will increase our happiness set point. But yes, there is, it's roughly, Lieber-Miesky's work would say we have about a 50% genetic predisposition to whether we're half glass full or half glass empty.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. I was actually wondering about that, because I also think that's really important for people to know and understand, because if your set point is, say, lower than your friend's set point, then you may beat yourself up a bit because you think, I'm not, by trying to be happier, you're becoming unhappier, as you said earlier. So it's probably good not to compare yourself with others either in that way.
So much research around the detrimental effect of comparisons. The only time comparisons are psychologically helpful is when they provide sort of an aspirational component where you think, what traits do they have that I'd like to have more of that? And we try and emulate or rise to that. That's not what our brain generally does. Generally, we do the comparison and we feel lesser because of it. That's not helpful.
Just hearing that just makes me think straight away of social media. I think for someone my age, you know, it doesn't have as much of an impact, but for young people, it can have, I imagine, a huge impact.
It's real. There's so much research now supporting a very, very negative impact, particularly in the teen years. There's a particular part of the brain that's forming at that time that it's a transition between belonging to your nuclear family before you're a fully fledged adult belonging to your new family that you make.
Yes.
The transitional period places a higher sensitivity to belonging to your friendship group. So the need to conform and to fit in becomes larger than any other period of your life. So comparisons form this, I've got to look like that, I've got to be like that. So it's quite a restless feeling.
Yeah, and it makes it particularly hard for the kids that don't fit that sort of the ideal mould, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does. It saddens me so much. I speak in schools around this to try and help young people. There's definitely no point in saying don't be on social media because that's here to stay.
Yeah.
It's just more around how can you manage your time on there. For instance, if you like a post or and comment on it in a positive way, oh, that looks like you're having a great holiday, or they look like great new shoes, where did you get those? That can help diminish the sense that I'm not as good as that.
Okay, well, that's interesting to know. Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's here to stay. So as parents or teachers or counsellors, we need to have some strategies to support our teenagers. So I just want to quote you back to yourself.
Don't you love that when your kids do that? That's the worst.
It is, isn't it? So on your website you say, happiness is your right, achieving it is your responsibility. We can't rely on external circumstances or people to make us happy. It's within all of us. It's simply a matter of knowing how. So what do you mean when you say we can't rely on external circumstances or people to make us happy?
What I mean by that, I reference again Lieber Mieske's work as well as another professor, Sean Aker, who've done a lot of work in the space to show it's a very human trait to place our happiness on the other side of something, and that something is usually material something. Yeah. So not always, it can be relationship something as well, but when I get that new job, I'll be happy. When I get the new car, I'll be happy. When I get the new relationship, I'll be happy. And we always anticipate that our happiness is connected with that thing and then we'll be all right. And the research will consistently show that sadly that's not true. And in fact, what's interesting is it's the exact opposite. It's when I'm happy now in this moment that the relationship will come into my life, that the right job I'll attract and so on. So by that, I mean, the circumstances around you, no circumstance carries an emotion with it. It's literally only our interpretation of the situation or the circumstance that creates our emotional response and chemical response to that. So if we're able to more objectively appreciate what we have in front of us right now and try and tame that natural side of our brain that wants to always think something's better later on, and so one of the tools is gratitude, for example, and people are probably tired of hearing about gratitude, but I can't play its significant importance. So let's just use that as one example. Yes. So in this moment right now, instead of focusing on, let's say I was really unhappy in my job and I know when I get my new job I'm happy, rather I could look at, okay, my current job might not be the best, but what's good in it? Well, I've got my workmate that I really like. And even if we went ridiculously simple, well, I get fresh hygienic water at my work. I know that sounds a bit small, but not everyone in the world gets an option just to turn on a tap and have good water, all those sorts of things. So you make a choice in your head around noticing how much good we all have in front of us all the time.
I think particularly here in Australia, we're very, very lucky. It sounds a little bit Buddhist-like to me, you know, appreciating the moment. And in Buddhism, they talk very much about your mind, and just as you say, it's within your control how you react to a situation. And my favourite quote, which I know I've brought up before on this podcast, is want what you have, don't want what you don't have.
Oh, I love that.
It's really good, isn't it? It's so simple, but it speaks volumes, I think, just appreciating, as you said, what's around you. And so then if someone is struggling a bit in life, they maybe feel unfulfilled, or they would like to improve their well-being, how can a life coach, or you in other words, help that person find the happiness within themselves?
There's so many different tools and strategies, but one of the foundational ones that I particularly love is this was a piece of work by Martin Seligman specifically, and Chris Peterson with him. They've discovered that we all have, every human, regardless of race, gender, culture, we all share 24 strengths of character. And I love that piece of work, because it's free. So you can go on to a website and complete the survey, and it's free, and it'll list your 24 strengths. We all have them, but it'll list the order of preference with which you use them. So that website's
don't worry, I'll find it. I'm pretty sure I've done that.
viacharacter.org.
Yeah.
Yes, so that once you know what your top 5 strengths are, then you can lean into those intentionally, because your top strengths are very innate to who you are. You feel very energized, very engaged when you're in them. So if you can use them in your work or with your relationships, knowing what your top ones are and intentionally bringing them in, then life just feels much easier.
Because if you were in a job where you weren't honouring those traits, then you can see how difficult that would be for someone.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But the good thing is that even if you were currently in a job that perhaps didn't call upon your top strengths, once you know what they are, you can internally choose to bring them to that role without even needing to talk to your manager about it or anything, and it can make your role feel more satisfying.
Oh, that's so good, isn't it? I like the concept that you don't have to make a radical change all the time. It's about reframing how you see what you're already doing. If we talk about some practical tools and strategies, I've come up with a few, I guess, scenarios or things that I'd like to ask you about, Steph. So one of the ones I think that would interest a lot of listeners is the world news. So at the moment, when we switch on the world news, there are so many stories of destruction and despair. There's COVID, obviously, the floods in Queensland and New South Wales, the war in the Ukraine, and just the devastation we're seeing every day on the television. It can feel really overwhelming, and it also sometimes makes you feel like the world is just hopeless and grim. So do you have any suggestions to counter that?
It's a really good question, because I mentioned earlier that we have a negativity bias in our brain. So, of course, news is primarily negative.
It is.
And it is based on that predisposition of our brain, because it hooks us in. That's what's going to get us to listen to the news, not if they did a whole service about what's going well. So it's intentionally there to grab our negative interest. Of course, the flow-on effect of that from a emotional perspective is it's hard to feel really good when you're just watching such terrible things happen. So I often suggest to my clients is really, really try and minimize your news consumption. Now, obviously, we have to have some awareness about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, sure.
So I find it striking a balance between completely burying your head and being consumed by negative messages all the time. So I use an app that just gives me a summary of the news headlines. So I'm just across the high-level headlines, but I don't follow the links. I don't look at the images intentionally. So minimizing your time actually consuming news.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, I suppose, with that negative bias, is trying really hard to hunt out, seek for things that lift your brain, that lift your mood. So whether there's any success stories, or whether even if it's just a podcast that I follow it brings me daily joy. There's something on Instagram called the Kangaroo Sanctuary. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, no.
So, every day they save orphaned kangaroos. Aww. And they just have images every day of these gorgeous little kangaroos, and that literally brings my heart joy looking at them every day. So I try and have my feed filled with things like that, without burying my head to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, oh, that's really good advice, because of the negativity bias, we can just keep on. It's like going down a rabbit hole, isn't it? I can sometimes get so sucked into the news, I can't stop. I watch one channel, then I'll flick to the next and watch all the same stories that I've just seen, but I just keep on going. Related to that a little bit is, I think the advice you've given is really good. The problem for me, and I imagine other people may have this problem, is if you live with someone who... My husband is obsessed with news. He has it on all the time, and sometimes I just want to turn it off, and so maybe I need to have a chat with him about that.
He would benefit if he could watch less. So yes, I'd encourage a conversation, and if not, if you can put in your own headphones and not be exposed to it if you can.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to touch on is women. I know there's research out there that supports what I'm about to say, but women tend to be very hard on themselves. We are often very self-critical, and we do set extremely high standards for ourselves. So why is that? Do you have a theory on why women are like that?
There definitely is a lot of research to support that. Obviously, it's not just the domain of women. However, I love there's research in the space of applying for a job, and it doesn't apply to everybody, but generally with women, there might be, say, 8 criteria, and they'll go, oh, I've got this one. They'll have 7 of the 8, and then they'll go, oh, I haven't got the 8th one, I can't apply. Men will, and I'm generalising, of course, but generally men will go, oh, I've got the first 4, I've kind of done the 5th one a little bit, I'll wing the others and apply for the job. And we'll apply confidently, not sheepishly, because I don't think I've got all 8.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of evidence that women do. I'm not sure what sits under that from a psychological perspective, other than my best guess is women are genetically wired as the carers. We have a broader sensitivity to emotions. So, whether it's linked in with that, but it definitely exists.
Yeah, no, it does, doesn't it? And is there any ways then, if it's true that it does exist, that we can address this and try and, help ourselves a bit?
For sure. There's probably 2 things that I would suggest are the most effective. There's lots of different things, really coming back to how we talk to ourselves in our head. But linked to that, so 2 things I'd say is, there's a piece of work by a lady called Professor Kristen Neff, who talks very much about self-compassion. We tend to have quite a strong internal critic. We're our own harshest critic. Nobody probably would speak to us in the way we speak to ourselves. So what self-compassion is about is catching and noticing when you're being harsh or critical or judgmental on yourself internally, and just gently pausing and finding a softening for that. So firstly, gently acknowledging, wow, look at what I'm trying to do to myself right now. So we're not critical about that in itself, just rather observing it. Right. Oh, listen to me being critical. And then affording ourselves a sense of love and compassion and support in the same way we would if we heard, say, our very best friend saying those things that we've just said, what would we say to them? And saying that to ourselves. So it might be a softening like, wow, I can hear that you're being really hard on yourself around that, but it's okay because, of course, you're nervous going for this interview. That's normal. You've got lots of experience. It'll be all right. Or something encouraging.
And do you think the more we practice that, the better at it we get?
Definitely. It's a skill, Amanda. Yeah, really good point. As you develop it, it'll become far more of a reflex for you. Other one I might quickly mention too, because it's so helpful. This is a brain hack that I love. We have bidirectional feedback from our brain to our body and our body to our brain. So in other words, when our brain perceives there's something wrong, it will influence the body into a posture that shrinks us.
Right.
So from that evolutionary perspective, that made me less visible to a predator. And by curling down my chin and my shoulders, hunching over, I'm also protecting my vital organs.
Right.
So if we play with that in reverse, despite the fact we might be lacking in confidence, we might have an inner critic, we might not be feeling great. If I push my shoulders back, and I invite you listeners to do it as I'm saying it because you can feel it immediately, push your chest out, get your shoulders back and hold your chin up. And that posture feeds back to your brain, oh, I'm confident. And straight away, we cognitively feel stronger. So just holding a confident body posture, despite the fact you don't actually feel like it, will help you to feel better.
Wow, that's a great hack. I'm going to start trying that myself.
If you look up Amy Cuddy, she has a TED Talk. It's one of the most watched ones on that. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's amazing. On that topic of the mind-body connection, we know that there's a connection between our physical selves and our minds. And it's important to look after all aspects of our health, including our nutrition, our sleep, our mental health, and our movement, or in other words, exercise. So I'd like to hear your advice on how each of these play into our happiness and well-being, and your tips on the best way that listeners can look after these particular aspects of our well-being.
Thank you for asking that question because it couldn't make me happier. I know I sort of sense, particularly when I'm talking with workshops or with groups, and people sort of start to roll their eyes when I talk about, sleep, diet and exercise, because I think that we can confidently say everybody knows we need to exercise, we need to sleep, and we need to eat well. I just wanted to add, I guess, hopefully another perspective which might help provide even greater reason to do those things. And that is they're directly linked to our mental health as much as our physical health. And I would suggest if your listeners did nothing else other than look after those three things, sleep, diet, and exercise, your brain will feel significantly brighter and happier. So really briefly, with sleep, that's probably your core foundational piece. Most people are chronically short of sleep.
Yeah.
And it has such a significant effect. And we're very, very poor readers of the impact of bad sleep on us. So with sleep, all I'd suggest in a very brief way is setting our circadian rhythm. So we have a 24-hour circadian rhythm that determines which chemicals we excrete at which particular times that either wake us up or help us go to sleep. And the more we can set that rhythm, the better we'll sleep at night. So a really simple, highly effective way to do that is just expose your eyes to light first thing in the morning. As soon as there's sunlight, and I'm talking maybe 5 minutes. It doesn't have to, on a really cloudy, dull day, maybe 10 to 15. On a bright, sunny day, 5 minutes is enough. It has to be outdoors through a window. Windows cut out about 50% of the effect. So outdoors. And if you're up well before the sun is, then get on as many bright lights around you as you can. Like get your house lit up. But as soon as there's sun, head out there. So that helps the brain know very clearly it's daytime.
Right.
And then at the other end of the day, as soon as the sun's gone down, please hide your eyes from the light. So a very simple way of doing that is blue block glasses.
Yeah.
Not the best look. Ask my kids because they tease me about it all the time, but very effective. It'll block out all of the blue and green light. If not that though, as a minimum, please remove yourself from screens that emit blue light. So that's your phone, computers, TV, a good hour before bed, preferably from once the sun goes down. And get off your overhead lights. If you need to have light, have lamps low, because the receptors for the light sit at the top of our eyelids, so for the sun. So anything light that's above our head is more replicating the sun.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't ever heard about the position of the lights.
Honestly, if you just do that for your sleep, you'll find you'll sleep much more deeply, and trying to go to bed and rise at roughly the same time each day.
Yeah, I know. I think of all the things I've learnt through doing this podcast, sleep is the one that probably comes up the most often in terms of how we can look after ourselves better. So I've been focusing a lot on that lately. And I think the other thing about sleep is giving yourself permission to prioritise it. Whereas in this, this busy culture we live in, it was often the thing that got neglected, I think.
There was almost a badge of honour around how little sleep I need. 95% of all people need 8 hours sleep. And I would say 80% of all my clients tell me that they're the sort of people that only need 5 or 6.
Yeah.
It's not right. We don't think we do, but we do. So yes, prioritising sleep and settling yourself well before bedtime. Don't work manically up till bed and then get into bed and think your brain's going to switch off.
Right, yeah.
And then the other two, just really quickly.
Yes.
So diet, everyone knows it. Try and, if possible, eat organic or clean food, and really stack up your vegetables and minimize your meat. And that's from a health perspective, not from an animal cruelty perspective or anything. Also, there's all sorts of other reasons, but from a health perspective, well, we're better off with less meat, particularly at night time. It's very, very hard for our stomach to digest meat, and so a lot of energy is required. So if our body's using the energy to digest a big meal right when we've gone to bed, that disrupts the level of sleep we can get.
And the repair that our body does during sleep.
That's right. So yeah, lots of veg, minimise processed foods and sugars, really.
Yeah.
And everyone knows those things. And exercise is just simple. It's just moving. I think we overcomplicate exercise. There's often a perception I have to be hurting, or I have to be, doing something that I don't necessarily enjoy. I can't stress enough. Exercise is simply moving on a daily basis. You've got to be puffing a little bit, but do something you love, because otherwise you're not going to keep doing it.
Absolutely. That's brilliant advice. I mean, finding something you love is really the key.
Yes.
And it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's kayaking or hiking or walking your dog every day or whatever it is.
Totally. Dancing while you're vacuuming.
Yeah, dancing.
The incidental exercise is amazing. Just take the stairs instead of the elevator. There's so much more evidence now that shows the benefits of exercise are cumulative. So we used to think, I have to do 20 or 30 minutes in one hit, and we don't. We can just do a few minutes here, a few minutes there. It's a bit, I know I'm probably a little strange, but I'll lunge between my bedroom to the bathroom.
Not strange.
A little. I'll squat while I'm brushing my teeth. So you can just get in these little incidental bits of exercise.
In fact, one of the other guests I interviewed last year, Martin Gabala, he is researching into high-intensity interval training and short bursts called exercise snacks, and that's exactly the kind of thing that he talks about. So that was really interesting. And Steph, before you came on, I put a post on Instagram asking if anyone wanted to ask you a question. So I did receive some responses. So there's two I'd like to put to you. The first one is from Jessica Lee from the Spark Effect, and she said she'd like some advice on how to find happiness amidst chronic physical pain.
That is a really common question. So, and I probably need to preface this by saying this isn't my field of absolute expertise, but it interests me a lot. Yeah. So I'll share with you what I know from an interest perspective and what I've worked with my clients on, which is it's very much that mindfulness state is where obviously pain because it's painful, it calls our attention. So we tend to look at it and we tend to tense up. So by looking at it and tensing up, it accidentally magnifies the pain. So doing the opposite can just be really helpful, which is to take a breath and try and intentionally relax your body with the out breath, just letting your body release. And then seeing if you can sit alongside the pain and observe it in a completely non-judgmental way. So it is neither good nor bad. It just is. And I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to get curious. Curiosity is the most amazing attribute we can bring toward anything uncomfortable, actually, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain. Sitting there, taking a breath and looking at, let me just look at you, pain. If you had a colour, I wonder what colour you'd be. If you had a shape, well, what shape would you be? I'm going to sit here and notice you. And in doing that, it seems almost counterintuitive because sometimes people will say, oh gosh, are you kidding me? If I turn and look at it, it's going to explode. Yeah. And it actually does the opposite. It helps it subside.
That just shows how intricately tuned our brains are to our bodies and how we can, I don't know if manipulate's the right word, but influence the way we think, and that influences the way we feel.
That's right, very much.
And the second question I had was from Eliza Richards, and she is a highly sensitive person. So she asked for some tips about how highly sensitive people can stop the negativity because they have to try extra hard to do this.
Do I have permission to go a little bit left of centre with this answer?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
You don't need my permission.
So my personal belief, and I'm basing this belief on the clients that I see, I am just increasingly having this question asked of me. And it is generally of a younger and younger generation. Right. I think the next generation is here. My hope and belief is they're actually here with this heightened sensitivity because they're going to be the ones that save all of us. And we're going to need to be that sensitive to Mother Nature, to Mother Earth, respectful. That's the only way we're going to survive, I think. And they're here to do that. Now, it's a blessing and a curse being highly sensitive. It brings you this beautiful connection with humans. However, it is, you need to learn how to manage it, or you get infected by other people's negative emotions because of your extra sensitivity. So there's a really beautiful meditation that I can suggest that protects our aura from being penetrated by negative emotions. So it's helpful for anyone, whether you're highly sensitive or not, but particularly highly sensitive people. So can I just briefly describe that? Yeah,
please do.
Okay, so basically what you do is, I normally just do it sitting on the edge of my bed. I usually start my day doing this because I'm in contact with a lot of clients during the day, and a lot of people, they're coming to see me because they're not in a good place.
Yes.
So I have, accidentally negative energy around me. So if you just close your eyes and try and sort of, without hunting for it, but feel into where your aura lies around you, where your energy extends to. Our energy emanates out from us, and the more depressed we are, the closer it is to our body. Right. The more positive and up we are, the further it comes out. And often highly sensitive people can have quite a big aura. So it's there's a bigger space to catch other people's emotions.
I see.
So if you kind of just close your eyes and don't worry too much if you can't feel it, but see if you can just sort of feel into where your energy ends. And what we want to do, if it's too big, see if you can pull it in. I mean, if your listeners could see me, I'm using my arms. I literally cup my arms in the air like I'm pulling my energy in to what would be, if you imagine an egg shape all the way around you, so a little bit smaller at the top, going a bit wider midway and going under, that you want your aura in that kind of egg shape. So I'll pull my aura around about an arm's length from my body. So that's how far we want it out. So if it's further than an arm's length, pull it in. If it's less than an arm's length, you can kind of push it out a little bit. You just want to sense on your energy there. as I said, if that feels tricky, don't worry too much about the edge of it. The next step is more important. That then imagine that the sun's rays are like sprinkling down on you like from a shower head. And we're really picking up the violet ray. And we want that violet ray of the sun to sprinkle over the outside of the eggshell, if you like, of the aura, and have this beautiful violet light now going around our aura. And so the violet light is very protective of our negative energies. So if we just really imagine this beautiful blue or violet light now is all around the outside of our eggshell, around our body, and you just take that into your day, and it really does help protect your energy.
I love the sound of that. When you said imagining the sunlight sprinkling down on you, does that mean it's better to do this outside, or is it just more something, an image that you're thinking of?
It's definitely fine with an image. Anytime you can get outdoors and anytime you can get your feet on earth and your body in the sun, that's going to be good for your soul and your energy anyway. So probably is enhanced doing it outside.
Oh, I love that advice. So hopefully if Eliza's listening, she'll try that and it will be helpful for her. Steph, I think it's time for us to land this plane. So thank you for addressing those listener questions. And I know that you were a lifelong netball player, but a few years ago you switched to sprinting, as you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast. And I know you're very modest, but you are an accomplished masters athlete and you've won some gold medals. So how on earth did you take up sprinting? How does that happen?
I know. I took it up at 50, which is, I didn't really think I'd ever pick up a new sport then. It was really just because my son was sprinting at the time and his coach just said to me, I was playing netball, and because my son was training and I don't like just sitting still, so I would just come in my running gear and I just move around, and his coach said to me, look, you've kind of got the physique of a sprinter. Do you want to join us? And I was thinking, well, all of your squad are like teenagers and I'm 50. Probably not. But thankfully, my son was pretty keen. He was like, that'd be cool, Mum. So thanks to him and the coach, I joined in and found out, A, that I could do it, and B, that I love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how often do you train in a typical week?
So we're on the track 3 times a week and in the gym twice a week.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. I recently read Hugh Van Cuylenberg's books, and I know that he does some sprint training as well. In a similar story, he's training with a whole lot of much younger women that he kind of tries to keep up with.
Yes, I have evolved since then. I'm with a masters running group now, so there's a lot of people more my age. Feels a little more appropriate, but it was fun starting with the young ones.
Oh, that's so great. I love that story. So do you still play netball, or was it just too much and you've moved away from that?
Look, I have not used the word retired from netball because I literally played for 47 years netball.
Wow.
43 years. I loved it. So not retired, but they're not complementary at all, sprinting and netball.
Oh, I bet they're not.
I've just paused netball, may or may not get back to it.
Yeah. I mean, netball's notorious for injuries, isn't it?
Yeah, I was so lucky. Maybe I shouldn't go back because I didn't ever really have anything major.
Maybe you're like Ash Barty, quit while you're ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a touch older than her when I quit.
Yeah. So, Steph, who inspires you?
Do you know, probably in terms of sprinting, I think there are some women in our group that are in their 70s and 80s.
Wow.
And they are phenomenal. I mean, they run like people in their 20s. And without exception, whenever I look at them, it just keeps this massive sense of hope for what's possible. It makes you realize you don't have to get old and be in a walking frame. You just got to keep moving.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. The same when I line up at the start of whatever it is, whether it's a triathlon or a trail running race, there's often people in their 70s there. I mean, there's not a huge group of them, but there's always a handful. And to me, they're the most remarkable people out there. I just think, I want to be like you.
That's right. Yeah. And there's no reason you can't be.
Yeah. The final question that I like to ask all my guests is, if you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be?
Outside of the things we spoke about, I would say just be super careful with your thoughts. We did touch on this. I just really want to reiterate, just super careful with your thoughts all the time in terms of just noticing what we can't control is the first thing that comes into our head. But recognizing that we are then in the driver's seat for what we do with that. We're not at the mercy of our brain that will want to just take us off into a negative spiral. We have a choice to say, no, hang on a minute, what's another way I could see this? What's another way I could approach this? Recognizing that we can control where our thoughts go is very empowering. And along that line, and I know I have spoken about it, but I just want to reiterate it, is really genuinely pausing to look at what I have in this moment right now to be thankful for. And the bit I want to just expand on that from that I didn't say earlier is to feel into that feeling. It can't just be a cognitive exercise. If you just go, oh yeah, okay, I'm grateful for water, actually nothing happens. But if you just pause, I often shut my eyes and really, I know, usually put my hand on my heart because that does help amplify authentic heart energy. And I just feel into, this is actually amazing. I'm really lucky. If you do that, drip that throughout the day, then that keeps your brain in such an optimal brain state.
The thing that I love about that message, Steph, is that it's such a simple solution or such an easy thing to do, isn't it? And
it is.
And it can have such an enormous impact on our well-being.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it is important just to remind, though, it doesn't mean we can't have negative things happen.
Yeah.
They do and they will, and that's normal and it's fine. It's about sitting with those, but then not dining out in them. Then making a choice. I've felt this and I've lived through it, and now I'm doing something intentional to lift myself out.
Yeah. And I also think maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably okay if something bad happens in your life to wallow in it for a little while before you to sort of acknowledge those thoughts and feelings before you then go, okay, and then start challenging those thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, really good point. It's not only okay, it's essential. Otherwise, we don't resolve those emotions. They actually sit there squashed in us. So it's not an invitation to say, push that one away and let's focus on something I'm grateful for. It absolutely let the feeling move through you completely. So sometimes we need to have a good cry or a good yell, talk to a friend. The difference, though, is once we start to whinge about it, complain about it, keep percolating on it, ruminate on it, that's when it shifts into being unhelpful.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. So, Steph, if someone listening to this podcast would like to follow what you do and look at your website, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my website is livelifecoaching.com.au. I put posts up there on my Facebook, so it's the same, Live Life Coaching. Put up often, not daily, but posts of reminders of these types of tools and interventions, the ones that I think are most helpful.
Great. So, and I will put links to all of that in the show notes. So, Steph, thank you so much for coming on Vibrant Lives podcast today. I've really enjoyed our chat.
I've had a ball. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with life coach Steph Noon and learnt some useful tips to enhance your happiness and well-being. If you did, please tell your friends about the podcast and share it. And if you could take a minute to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, it will help people find my podcast, and I'm always so grateful for that. So you can subscribe to Vibrant Lives podcast on most good podcast providers like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. And you can also subscribe on YouTube. And please do follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast and check out my website at vibrantlivespodcast.com. On my website, you'll find a library of all my podcast episodes and reviews of books I recommend and more. So please DM me or send me an email via the contacts page on my website and let me know what you'd like to hear more of, or if you just want to say hi. Coming up soon, I'm interviewing David Richmond about his project called Cycle of Lives. And for this, he rode his bicycle approximately 5,000 miles, that's 8,000 kilometres, across the United States to raise money and awareness for cancer. It was a phenomenal feat and a really interesting story, so I'm looking forward to that one. This podcast is recorded on ancient Kaurna land. I acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of this land and pay respects to their elders past, present and future. Thank you for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.